Do you secretly enjoy the sound of your mother vacuuming your filthy, lice-ridden room? Do you struggle to make eye contact when going to the doctors to check on your very unusual health issue? Are your crepes so ridiculously fresh that you have no choice but to intensely stare at them during important activities? Well, it seems like shoegaze is the perfect genre for you. Shoegaze is a style of alternative rock that focuses on dreamy walls of noise, often created with the aid of far too many effects pedals, which often include distortion, reverb, and delay. It's essentially the result of far too much disposable income, anxiety, and zero melanin. Guitars often reach an overwhelming level of volume, completely crushing the vocals in the mix, resulting in completely unintelligible lyrics, which is usually pretty beneficial because it's unlikely you'll be able to fucking understand what they're saying anyway. Oftentimes, shoegaze guitarists will have an unhealthy obsession with the tremolo arm, smacking that shit as often as possible. This, combined with the pedals, produces a sound that is indistinguishable from the sound produced after you dare your little cousin to hide in the washing machine for too long. The term shoegaze seems like an unusual name for a genre. This is until you actually go to a shoegaze concert and you're greeted with a gaggle of ectomorphs in oversized jumpers and skinny jeans, completely avoiding eye contact with the crowd, instead shifting their gaze back and forth from their £200 reverse reverb pedal and £20 Sports Direct shoes. They truly are just gazing at their shoes. You're probably all sat very confused after the complete waffle I just spat out at you, so let's get into some more details. Let's find out how shoegaze actually started and how it's developed into the modern day sound. Much like every genre, the first rumblings of shoegaze come from pretty much here, there and everywhere. From the Beatles to the Velvet Underground to the early ambient work of Brian Eno. Essentially any piece of music that experimented with layers of instrumentation that leaves the mix completely crowded. One interesting early example is You Really Got Me by the Kinks. This song features heavy distortion, which was apparently caused by Ray Davies accidentally stabbing his amplifier, although this isn't entirely confirmed. This soundly proves that shoegaze was a complete mistake, no room for argument. These early rumblings of inspiration aren't really clear cut and don't really sound like shoegaze, so let's look into some other things. Seems like the first real rumblings of shoegaze came out the post-punk scene in the 70s. Post-punk is what happens when you take punk and tell the guitarist that there are more ways to play the guitar than just spamming 3 power chords in sequence. This resulted in bands taking inspiration from a variety of genres and adding it to the noise, energy and attitude of punk. A quintessential early post-punk band would be Wire, who would create one of the earliest proto-shoegaze songs. Map referenced 41 degrees north, 93 degrees west. This song would not only include strangely affected guitar and thick soundscapes, but also a f***ing terrible name that would be a key feature of future shoegaze songs. The Cure's 100 Years would also lay a few bricks in the groundworks of shoegaze. The Cure's frontman would also emulate the shoegaze performing style when touring with Susie and the Banshees, and when I say the shoegaze performing style, I mean literally just standing still. Another song from the era, which literally just sounds like a shoegaze song, is Heroes by David Bowie, which was produced by the previously mentioned Brian Eno. And that would be the end of the 1970s, but don't worry, the 80s would produce a more concretely developed shoegaze sound. In 1983, the Scottish gibberish-speaking band Cocteau Twins would essentially invent dream pop with their album Head Over Heels. The band would combine effect-heavy, dreamy guitar with vocals that were completely overcrowded in the mix, creating a style that would inspire the majority of future shoegazers. But of course, the Scottish and the Irish hate each other, so there would be one band that would go against this, literally refusing to use the same effects pedals as the Cocteau Twins. This band would be My Bloody Valentine. More on them later. Continuing the trend of Scottish people creating scatty music out of pure boredom, the Jesus and the Mary Chain would start making some very f***ing noisy music, essentially combining musical incompetence with extremely loud amplifiers. The band would use heavily distorted guitars, dreamy atmosphere, and low mixed vocals, creating another proto-shoegaze sound. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention they also caused literal riots at the majority of their early concerts due to musical incompetence and incredibly short sets, seemingly also inspiring a lot of trap artists in the modern day. This degeneracy wouldn't just be contained in the UK, however. America had just completed their DC hardcore arc, with bands like Husker Du developing on the sound, adding more layers of distortion and slowing that shit down. They became a driving force in the development of shoegaze, but this time they weren't stuck in a field in the middle of the UK countryside, they were straight up just in America, allowing the sound to reach wider audiences. But this is all just proto-shoegaze, none of this is real shoegaze. I think it's time to get into the real what Zero Pussy does to a motherfucker type bands. Another band that needs no introduction, apart from the introduction that I'm going to give them, My Bloody Valentine. These cheeky little c***s would release the You Made Me Realise EP in 1988. The guitarist from the band, Kevin Shields, would essentially just f*** with borrowed equipment until he made some crazy noises. He would use a Jazzmaster with a tremolo arm alongside distortion and bar chords to create a signature sound on the track Slow. On the title track, Kevin would get his filthy mitts on a reverse reverb pedal, using this alongside copious amounts of chronic to make an incredibly fast-paced, distorted mess with a 40-second bridge of just noise that sounds like a Boeing 747 taking off. They would actually extend the duration of this bridge to up to 10 minutes in live performances, to really follow in the footsteps of Jesus and the Mary Chain's audience torture fetish. This EP signalled the beginning of the shoegaze era, which would thrive throughout the early 90s. Shoegaze would begin to spread through the UK like a disease. Ride would release their debut, adding speed, intensity and Britpop elements. Other artists of the time include Swerve Driver, Lush and Moose. These artists would be absolutely mogged in 1991 when My Bloody Valentine would release their magnum opus, Loveless. This album would begin its creation in 1989, and thanks to the success of their previous work, they had access to much better equipment. Kevin originally believed the album could be recorded in 5 days. Alas, 2 years and an almost bankrupted record label later, Loveless was released to a surprising amount of critical acclaim for the time, which would only increase in the 30 years since. Unfortunately, this album cost a lot of money to make, and due to various factors such as lack of marketing, a name that wasn't allowed on the record sleeve, and 0 singles, the album wouldn't even break even. Shortly after this, the label would drop My Bloody Valentine for basically taking all their money to create Vacuum Cleaner sound design. Luckily, it's very good Vacuum Cleaner sound design, meaning there was demand for a third album, but despite the demand, this wouldn't happen until 2013, as Shields would go a little bit loopy, a little bit wacky, and remained in hiding for a number of years. But what's this? A new challenger approaches? Let's think. Where in the UK is just about as boring as Ireland? What place could inspire another band to create this music out of pure boredom? Yes, Reading. Slowdive would form in 1989, releasing their masterpiece Slovaki in 1994. Slowdive was signed to the same label as My Bloody Valentine because apparently they thought signing another shoegaze band was a good idea. Slowdive were tasked to create a more commercially appealing sounding album. Upon release, the album would be pretty much on by every critic, with one critic actually saying, "I hate Slowdive more than him." Obviously, the album would flop, not only due to this, but also due to an advertising campaign that would, quote, go down in history as one of the laziest ever. This seems all doomy and gloomy. Luckily, there are two people in this world that are usually wrong, and that's music critics and boomers. Unfortunately, every single one of the reviewers for the album was both, and the album is currently loved by shoegaze enjoyers around the world, and seen as one of the greatest albums in the genre. Unfortunately, due to the critical reception at the time, Slowdive would fade into obscurity. This wouldn't be just the fate of Slowdive, however. Shoegaze as a whole would decline in popularity due to the rise of Britpop, because apparently at the time, England thought this was cooler than this. Bands like Oasis and Blur, even though the latter literally started their career making shoegaze, were blowing the genre out of the water in terms of popularity, because labels and lack of internet meant people couldn't actually decide for themselves what they wanted to listen to. The bands would either reinvent themselves or just move on with their lives. So where did shoegaze go? Did it just disappear? Fade into obscurity? Well no, you wouldn't be watching this video if it did, dum dum. Many of the genre conventions of shoegaze would make its way into other subgenres of music, specifically metal through subgenres like blackgaze, doomgaze and deepgaze. Bands included Deafheaven and Alcest. In the modern day, the shoegaze albums of the 90s have gained a newfound appreciation, with many albums becoming cult classics and a few even being seen as underappreciated masterpieces, specifically Souvlaki, which is surprising considering the heinous reception upon release. It's almost as if critics don't actually know what they're talking about. This newfound appreciation, combined with shoegaze gear being accessible to anyone with a bowl cut and dangly earring, has meant that shoegaze has had a little bit of a renaissance in recent years in regards to new sounds and talent entering the scene. Bands like Candy Claws, Julie and Blue Smiley have proved that there will always be a demand for a bunch of knob-twiddling freaks with overpriced pedals standing motionless on stage, absolutely violating the eardrums of anyone within a 10-mile radius.
1, 2, buckle my shoes.